We're going to talk about fashion technology, evolutions therein, how it's being used in a broader retail landscape, and also how it can inspire the independent retail sector. So Rachel is a journalist and a digital innovation strategist. She knows everything, pretty much, as far as I can tell. Seems to be how it rolls. And then Navaz Batliwale is also known as Disney Roller Girl, and has a very successful fashion blog in her own right, and also knows loads about fashion technology. So I'm really lucky to be joined by both of them. I'm going to throw out questions at the very end, so if you think of any specific questions that you have about how you might use technology in your store, or any other specific questions, please do feel free to ask those at the end. Rachel, I'm going to start with you. What are you most interested in terms of fashion technology at the moment? What is exciting you currently?
Big question. To be honest, I think it's just the fact that it is such an exciting time, full stop, with where fashion and technology are coming together. And I'm tracking everything from wearables to artificial intelligence to what's happening with obviously big data, all the way through to social media trends and obviously how we're engaging consumers, both online and in store. And I think there's all sorts of different trends that we can pull out because of that, whether it's specific technologies or if you look at the landscape at whole, I think there's two things I'm particularly A, excited about, and B, really following. One of them is kind of around how we're making shopping more seamless for the consumer. So that's everything to do with technology as it impacts fulfillment. And actually it's to do with the whole supply chain, obviously, but also how the shopper's getting their hands on it in terms of our omni-channel strategies and so forth. And also a bit in the way that sustainability is playing an increasing part in that and the role that technology has on that. And then the other side is around the experience the consumer has. So we are massively entering the experience economy. Today, 78% of millennials would rather spend money on an experience than they would a product. And I think that says so much for us as brands in terms of then how are we thinking about the way that we push out our products to people in an experiential way, and how are we using technology as part of that process mainly.
Can you think of any particular examples that you've seen of late where retailers have done a great job using an experience to add something to their retail environment?
Yes, but I'm going to give you a slightly different answer.
Far away.
I'm going to talk about Pokemon Go.
Fine.
Because who doesn't love that?
Yeah.
But for a reason. So for those of you who don't know, I'm sure that everyone does, but Pokemon Go being the new augmented reality game that launched a few weeks ago and has amazingly been popping up in loads of stores all around the world by good fortune, I think, for those stores. There's lots in Sephora and Forever 21 and H&M and places like that. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is kind of twofold, to talk about how important augmented reality is in terms of that tech landscape at the moment, where it crosses with virtual reality as well, and kind of saying, if you think it's not important, please think again, because virtual reality and AR together, mixed realities, as we sort of like to call them, are combined going to at some point become more important, not necessarily more important, sorry, as important as the smartphone in terms of a platform development over the next sort of 20 years, I'm talking about, as opposed to short scale. But the reason I think for retail it's really important is twofold. First of all, to really think around gaming and how important that's becoming. And again, if you think this doesn't apply to you, think again. 52% of gamers are women, and 33% of the total are women over the age of 18. So while we all think that it's young boys, teenagers that are kind of playing on their consoles in their bedroom, that kind of has completely shifted. And of course, the reason it shifted is because of mobile and because of social media and the fact that the majority of games kind of tie to those two things. So how are you kind of gamifying your retail experience? And I say that not in necessarily that you need to set up a Pokemon Go experience, but that you should be thinking around, how can you in some way tie incentives to loyalty? And the other side, of course, is around location marketing, and kind of seeing how important that has proven to be because of things like Pokemon Go, how that GPS filter is absolutely kind of key in the way that people are using their mobile phones today. And I think for local retail particularly, that opens up a lot of opportunity in terms of what you can do around your store, particularly as you then tie it into social media as well, Facebook and such like.
If you had to tie that down to a sort of single action or something to be thinking about or doing right now, specifically in artificial intelligence, what suggestion would you make? So something that people should be doing next week that is going to propel them into that space?
I think it would, I mean, first of all, obviously ensure that you have complete clarity on who your customer is. If she is 100 or he 100% not into anything to do with gaming whatsoever, don't necessarily completely disregard it. Do explore around that on a broader scale. But for me personally, I would be looking at the way that data and location marketing integrate, and particularly around if you're looking at social media and what you should do with that, upping your Facebook spend based on a kind of location targeting is probably, if we're talking about prioritizing from a budget perspective, take learnings from something as big as augmented reality gaming through to how you spend on location marketing. That might sound like several steps removed, but actually it's all part of the same pie.
Okay. Sorry about the noise, not sure what that is. Nivaz, do you have any thoughts on AI specifically?
No.
That's good, because I'll move on to the question that is specifically for you. What do you think is the most interesting area of fashion tech at the moment? What are you most excited about?
Well, for me, it's the story around Shoppable Instagram and Shoppable Pinterest, which for Instagram, I feel that retailers are still kind of like waiting for this to happen over here. I think it will happen, but not quite there yet. Pinterest is interesting because it is slowly coming over to the UK in terms of having a universal cart on Pinterest. So Pinterest is working with retailers and Shopify to let people shop from Pinterest without going outside the platform. And I think it's interesting because Pinterest is very much a place where people like to go to shop. Instagram is more a place where people go for inspiration, but you can see that people would like to shop from it. I'm not 100% sure it's necessarily going to be a good thing if everything's made shoppable. But that is the direction that things are going in.
Where lie the negatives there for you, if it does go that way?
I find that increasingly all social media is so commercialized that as a user you do feel constantly bombarded with people trying to sell you stuff, even bloggers, influencers. So if therefore Instagram, possibly Snapchat at some point, Pinterest, etc., are just flooded with shopping messages, it can just dilute the content on there essentially, because it's just becomes like a major, massive advertising kind of platform. So I think that there is a challenge there for retailers and brands to therefore make their content more engaging. Even though you are trying to sell stuff to people, you then need to work harder to make your content more engaging on those platforms.
Do you think that's probably the solution then? So rather than not engaging with those sales platforms to avoid pissing off potential consumers, it would be focusing more on making sure that content is interesting in and of itself? Or is that a combination of those two things?
Yeah, no, I definitely think, you can't not be on those platforms, that's where the consumers are. But then I think your challenge is to make your content stand out, because obviously you're competing with all the other retailers out there. So the way to do that, for example, with Instagram is you can, I think in terms of, I find that on Instagram quite a lot of the messaging on there is quite samey, because people find certain things work and then everyone does the same thing. Although saying that, there are certain things that do work. So in terms of the tone of voice, as Rachel said, and as we all know, you should really know what you stand for as a brand and who your target audience is. That's key anyway. And then adapt your tone of voice and maybe make it more conversational. You want to make it engaging. You want to draw in your customers and have them converse with you. Things like flooding your Instagram with hashtags is not engaging anymore. Using influencers is a good way to have engaging content. And I think what's interesting with Instagram is how it's using the new algorithms to affect the feed, the order of the feed.
Yeah. In terms of the content that could be generated by retailers to make sure that they really are being engaging, do either of you have any examples of people who are doing a great job on that? Even if they're not independent retailers, or even if they're not retailers, what kind of content do you both really enjoy seeing on your social media feeds?
Well, one of the things I've seen is Everlane, which is an American retailer. They have something that I think is quite interesting, is that they have something called Everlane Studio, which is a kind of like a private, it's one of those accounts where you have to be accepted to follow. And what I think that does is it's very engaging, because it's really like having a close community. If you're accepted in their community, then it's kind of like in the secret society kind of thing. And I think what they do is they show you, and I think it's shoes. I think they show you more sort of behind the scenes stuff. They get you involved in like maybe choosing some of the product. We're thinking of putting these colours out. What do you think? And it's very much kind of involving the consumer in their process and really like making you feel like you're part of, real part of their community. So things like that, I think, are, to me, is something that stands out as extra engaging content.
Anything to add to that, Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. Everlane is an incredible example across all social media channels. What they're doing on Snapchat is absolutely phenomenal as well. Definitely look at them. Same with Reformation, another West Coast brand. They do just really beautiful content, but they're very good at kind of speaking in the vernacular of that kind of millennial audience that they're going for. And then my third one, and if anybody's seen me speak before, I apologise because I use the same example everywhere, is Chubbies.
It's a good one though.
Yeah, you've heard me use this before. So Chubbies is a East Coast menswear brand that specialises in short shorts. And I'll give you their tagline because it literally sums up their entire personality. It's skies out, thighs out, which it does completely say it all. And they're brilliant on social media because they use that entire mindset with everything they do. So kind of, I imagine them sitting there putting everything through a filter of, is this funny enough? And does it hit our kind of bro audience on the right kind of a level? And to me, that kind of stands out because the personality really shines through the post, but everything is funny. They do this amazing email newsletter every week that is so funny. They now have an entire website called Friday at 5, which actually isn't branded Chubbies at all. At the bottom it says, brought to you by Chubbies, but the whole content is kind of menswear-oriented content that's much more lifestyle-focused. So they're just a brilliant brand to look at in terms of, particularly, we've been talking about it for a couple of years, but the trajectory that they've followed and how their content's evolved with them has been really phenomenal to watch.
Awesome. And on the topic of retailers and community, often when we're talking about building a community, we're doing it on the high street, like physical events, opening nights, live music, that kind of thing. But obviously, as technology advances, there's far more of an opportunity to build what ironically is actually quite a small network of people. Even though you've got access to the whole interwebs land, we're actually trying to build a community of really small, loyal, repeat customers with retail. Any other thoughts on any other technology that would support that? Any other developments recently that you think retailers could be looking to incorporate in order to achieve that?
I mean, in terms of geotechnology, which Rachel talked about earlier, I think it's quite interesting with Snapchat using geo-filters. I speak to quite a lot of retailers and brands, and they're quite slow on this. They don't really seem to be on Snapchat. I mean, I'm talking to the PRs, but they don't really seem to be on Snapchat, or if they do, they don't really know anything about the geo-filters and stuff like that, which are really great tools to kind of like bring people together in a physical environment. So I think there's something in that could definitely work. I mean, I think it's quite expensive to get those filters.
Yeah, it is.
But in the longer term, so it's tens of thousands at the moment, but to me it feels like they're testing that out, and then as time goes on they will make it cheaper so that everyone can do it.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. The sort of the Snapchat experience, and it's kind of the same with what I was saying about VR and AR. If you think it's not for you because it's not your customer, think again. I really think that you should be on Snapchat even if you're not posting a load of content. It's important to understand the method of it, because from my perspective, Snapchat as an aesthetic is completely impacting internet trends full stop in terms of the very visual language of fashion, and this kind of a shifting view from something that's very polished and beautiful that we are all sort of so focused on trying to produce for Instagram and spending budgets on, through to actually an expectation that quality doesn't matter quite as much if you are actually giving great access to things. People have a lot of fun on Snapchat, and again, that's kind of a new attitude that I think is really changing the fashion industry away from this kind of quite uptight world to this, let's be much more open, let's be much more fun, let's add geo filters to things, but let's add lenses to our faces. And it's why we're seeing, particularly with beauty, a lot of brands jumping on the Snapchat lenses and sponsoring them so that you can try a cat eye flick or whatever, brought to you by, I can't remember the brand now, Revlon or someone. Things like that, yes, they are big budget at the moment, but it is kind of shifting in a much broader sense what it means for fashion.
Photography is an interesting one. Do you feel that those changing standards of photography and imagery and what we're expecting in fashion apply only to Snapchat or its similar platforms? Or do you think that that's really fed through into the kind of images that we would expect in magazines and on other platforms?
I mean, I don't think it's changing the expectations still in terms of print. And I still think there's a need for that kind of polished view on Instagram. But at large, I do think we're seeing a bit more of a, what's the word, kind of certainly a shift to this sort of more candid view. So if you think, obviously like Facebook Live is massively exploding, what we're doing with Periscope is exploding, so that's feeding across other channels as well. And I think people would much rather have, and again, you have to be creative here. I'm not saying that everybody wants another backstage video or another making of, and you see the little hands putting things together. We're all a bit tired of that. But with a bit of creativity applied to it, certainly I think that there is some quite interesting things to be done in that space. And that's what I mean about it not just being about Snapchat, but a much broader view. And also goes through to the tone of voice that you have. I still see so many fashion brands saying, presenting the Autumn/Winter 16 handbag line on social media. It's like, that is the most boring tagline you could possibly come up with. Let's be a little bit more creative. As it's really simple, but things like emojis and stuff like that, they're doing really well in the space, and they're doing well in the space for a reason, because obviously they resonate with the consumers that are accessing them. And I think anything that you can have to kind of show personality or bring out who you are and why you connect with people is going to be a benefit to you, because it's anything that's a bit more personalized before you even get to data enabling it to be more personalized is a good thing.
And if the really big brands are working on being personal and approachable face, when realistically they're huge multinational conglomerates, obviously that's a space where independent retailers who actually probably know the names potentially of some of their most loyal customers, that's an amazing opportunity to be a point of difference and to have a fantastic USP. So it's great really that we're going in that direction, that personalization is important, because it's an area where the independent retailers can really excel, which is great news for all of us. I just wanted to touch briefly on the algorithms side of things and just how it works for the dim among us, like me. How does it change what you should be doing on social media if they've changed their algorithms?
Also for me, I think, I'm not sure if it's actually happened yet. I know it's happened on Twitter. So Instagram is bringing in these changes whereby it's going to affect what you see in your feed and show you what it thinks you want to see based on your previous behavior. So for brands, that means it's probably going to be pushing the branded content down your feed so you don't see it, which is obviously not a good thing. So brands, how can brands kind of like overcome that? One of the things I mentioned earlier is working with influencers and bloggers. So inevitably, what it actually does mean is that the influencers are in a better position, because their content tends to be, even if it's sponsored content, it tends to be much more engaging. It's outfits shown in an environment that's relatable. People just generally engage better with that content. So it could be that brands work with those influencers or bloggers to create content with them. It could be that just as a brand, if you see people on social media wearing your product or showing it in an interesting way, you can just reach out to them and say, can I use your image? You have to credit them, obviously, but that's a nice ready-made image for you to use on your content. I guess it's taking inspiration from those influencers and how they show the product, and also, I guess, as Rachel was saying, make it more lively, make it more funny. It obviously needs to be in line with what your brand message is, but just kind of think outside the box and don't do the equivalent of what Rachel did, which is, this is our new handbag from our new collection. You just really need to be creative with it. And I met someone from Bell & Bunty, which is a sort of bridal women's wear line. I met someone from there at a dinner, and she's one of the partners, but she said one of her main roles is the content. So maybe 5-10 years ago, you would both be designers and one would be doing marketing and one would be doing sales or whatever. Now, the content and editorial is a really key part of her job. And I think that was quite an interesting thing to know. I mean, you really do have to take it seriously. You need someone to be focusing on it and not just, get the intern to do it, which was what the mindset was 5 years ago. Pinterest actually is different. Pinterest is they don't see it as a social media platform. People go on Pinterest because they're much more in the mindset of looking for inspiration for things to buy. So whether it's an outfit for a holiday or new shoes for a wedding or something like that, or even interiors, people are much more in a mindset of shopping. So what they say is that again, the images need to be inspiring. Don't just use hack shot images. I even find catwalk images aren't that inspiring because they're quite samey. So you need a good image, but also the copy that you have in your description, they suggest that it has either tips, how to wear tips, as much information about the product as you can, even the pricing. People use Pinterest as a search engine, so you want that search to come up with as much information in it as possible.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Any thoughts on that, Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Navaz. The only thing I would add is just, the days of complete 100% organic reach are over. There is no such thing as setting up a social media account and just naturally gaining, millions of followers and hundreds of sales off the back of it. So my main thing would be just don't think that you can get away with not spending money on them anymore, particularly if you're looking at Facebook. And I say that, you don't have to spend an absolute fortune, but experiment with spending a little bit here, a little bit there, targeting different groups and seeing what kind of sticks. Because Facebook, same as Instagram, the algorithms have completely changed. We've all seen it in our own feed. You get a lot more news, then you do baby pictures now, which is thumbs up. But that will obviously impacts brands in the other way around. And actually, Facebook recently have said that you're going to start seeing less news and brands again because people have been complaining about the fact they want to see more of their friends and family. So I think, particularly for the big organisations from your BuzzFeeds and so forth of the world that have really been able to ride the coattails of that kind of news-led algorithm on Facebook, that's really changing for them. So and similarly, it also will for brands. So I think the only real way around it, obviously partnering with influencers on any of these platforms is always going to be a bit of a win for the markets that they reach. But similarly, just backing your posts, if you know that you've got something that maybe organically is doing quite well, and then you can shove some money behind it to kind of boost it that bit further, it will benefit you.
Yeah, fantastic. I've got another couple of questions, but does anybody have any questions from the audience? We've got a microphone at the back there for you. Have you got anything specific? No, keep thinking. If you were an independent retailer at the moment, you mentioned that you would need to spend money. There's no way that you can run your online communities all that well without spending a little bit of money on it, and we talked about AI as well. Where would you spend a limited marketing budget at the moment, Rachel?
Facebook.
On Facebook?
Yeah. Because I still think it depends on your brand, obviously, or your store. But I particularly think if you are a local independent, that offers the most opportunity for localized targeting, much more so than the other channels. Obviously it is a social network, it's not a shopping channel and so forth, but I think that probably has the most potential in terms of long-term reach as well. Plus you add in all the extra bits that go with it, from Facebook Messenger through to obviously Instagram and WhatsApp, and you've got a bit of a network there that you should really be thinking about in terms of ways to contact your customers. And haven't really spoken about artificial intelligence, but certainly what we're starting to see happen with around what we call conversational commerce and chatbots through Facebook Messenger is definitely a world that's going to really explode, and people should be starting to be aware of, not necessarily yet 100% using.
If you had limitless budget, where would you spend it with the AI side of things specifically?
Well, if people had limited budget, I'd like them to do some really cool stuff so that I have great things to write about. That would be lovely.
Noted. We'll make a note of that.
I think the world's your oyster at this point in terms of technology. As I said at the beginning, there is so much exciting stuff happening. If you had absolutely no limits on budget, which let's face it, no one has, then I would love to see people really experimenting with virtual reality. Because I do genuinely think there's an amazing opportunity there in terms of that experiential side of consumer engagement, particularly in the store.
In what way?
So I had a really, really good example of how best to define the world of virtual reality. And again, everybody kind of thinks of virtual reality as being a gamer's thing, and it's really quickly shifting on from that. As I said at the beginning, it's kind of the next platform after the smartphone, looking at a 20-year view. And the best example I heard of it is a guy called Chris Milk, and if you've never heard of him, go and look him up. He's got the most amazing TED Talk if you're slightly interested in virtual reality. And he essentially explains virtual reality as being a tool of empathy, because I'll give you one example. The New York Times ran a campaign at the end of last year called The Displaced, and it was a view on the global refugee crisis. This is really far removed from fashion, but it's a really nice example of kind of the immersion of technology. And what basically happened was that you put on a headset, they sent them out with the New York Times, with the Sunday paper, just the Google Cardboard, which you literally fold up yourself and put your smartphone in. So it's really basic. Any of you can do it now, you can get one. And do, in fact, go and do it, because this is a really amazing experience. And you put it on and you can learn about the refugee crisis through the eyes of 3 children who are from Syria, into South Sudan and somewhere else I can't now remember. And what Chris Milk, who was the CEO behind the virtual reality company that did this project, and this won really big at Cannes Lion this year, which is why I'm so familiar with it. And what he said is that it's an empathy tool because it's kind of connecting us with humanity in new ways that we've never been able to experience before. So you think about refugees, we all feel like we have a relatively good understanding of that world because we see it on TV a lot, we hear it in the news and so forth. But none of us, not many of us, have actually been in a refugee camp and experienced firsthand what that's like. So this is kind of what he says, that tool that connects us with humanity, because for the first time, if you think about the way that we consume media, it is always through a box or a frame. So it's a box on YouTube, it's a box in your front room, it's a box in your hand. And for the first time, virtual reality is enabling you to go inside that box. So he's like, you're going inside the frame, and for the first time, through technology only, you feel like you are literally there. So I really, really do encourage all of you to go and try it out, because it is honestly the most phenomenal experience. It's quite breathtaking in terms of the way that virtual reality can make you feel. And I've tried ones where, and again, it sounds so sort of fluffy and like it's about gaming, and honestly it's not. I've tried one where you can choose where in an opera you stand. So you could stand as the conductor and you can look up and down and all around and you can experience the actual opera itself. And it is honestly breathtaking because you feel like you're literally there having this experience. And obviously fashion has tried this out quite a bit already. We've done catwalk shows and so forth, but it's been a really basic experience because it's been passive. So you sit there on the front row and you can see Tommy Hilfiger or Rebecca Minkoff or whoever you want coming down the catwalk. But long term, as this technology gets more intelligent, which it is doing, or more advanced, I should say, you'll be able to choose which direction you want the story to be in. You'll be able to interact with the people that are coming down the catwalk or so forth. You'll be able to bring your friend in as well. And this is the single-handed reason why Facebook invested in Oculus Rift from the off, because they understand that virtual reality long-term has the potential to be the next social network, because you could put a headset on and I could put a headset on and we could be somewhere else and people could be watching us on the screen as if we're actually there in person, because you won't need to physically be there, because by putting the headset on, you'll completely feel that you are. So it sounds really futuristic and a bit weird and everything else, and the idea of us all being really sort of boring people in the future that just sit in our lounges and only put VR headsets on and experience everything through that. But genuinely, it has got enormous potential in terms of the kind of experiential side. And then as we start to apply that to retail, obviously it could mean all sorts of wonderful things.
Fantastic. It's obviously a really exciting time, and we can all keep our eye on how this amazing technology adapts to a retail environment and how we can all be using it. Nivaz, do you have any final thoughts on things that you would do right now if you were a retailer from all the stuff that we've just talked about?
I think for me as a retailer, as an independent retailer, I think it would be more about looking at your local, identifying some of your local either customers, influencers, and possibly targeting them. I think people have this, for some reason, we all kind of like think of influencers and bloggers as like people out there that have like hundreds of millions of followers, but there can be people very close to you, your actual customers who come in your store, on your high street, and they might actually have quite a good social media following. It might not be sky high, but within their network, it might be quite influential. So it could be a good idea to engage with them, possibly pay them or give them some sorts of benefits, give them access, give them maybe discounts, or let them do an event in your store, or just something that's fun for them, that engages them and lets them bring their kind of network to you. And that's like quite a nice way to engage with them in IRL as well as online. So you've got the two together.
We're all so down with the kids. So down with the kids. We're hip, we're cool. That's brilliant, that's a really great idea, thank you so much. That's all we've got time for, but these guys will be at the side of the stage, I think, for a few minutes afterwards if you did have any questions. Thank you very much to Rachel and Nivaz.
Thank you.